So in our latest edition of Downforce Meets, I'm pleased to welcome on Zoom a very accomplished individual who has been traveling up and down, left and right, front and center in motorsport. And he is the author of the fantastic book recently released by Evro Publishing, Shadow, The Magnificent Machines of a Man of Mystery. I'm pleased to welcome along from South California, Pete Lyons. Pete, pleased to meet you, and good to see that you're keeping well in these very difficult times at the moment.
And it's a delight to meet you too, Alex. Thank you.
So firstly, for those wondering about the book itself, which you can actually see in both Pete's background, but also in the center of our video here. There we go. Nicely modeled there, Pete. It's £75. It's a hardback edition. It's provided by Evro Publishing, and it is available now. Pete, really, firstly, the biggest question I need to ask is that what was the genesis of chronicling this mysterious team called Shadow? Because I understand that from 1973 to 76, you were correspondent for both Autosport and Auto Week in Formula One.
Correct. And before that, for Autosport. Prior to that, I covered American racing for Autosport, and which means I was in at the beginning of the Can-Am. And of course, Shadow came into the Can-Am in 1970 with that amazing, remarkable, startling little go-kart on steroids, as they called it, the tiny tire car. And so that I was at the first race for Shadow, as I was for the first Formula One race for Shadow in 73 at Kyalami. When both of those cars were driven by George Follmer. George is an incredibly brave individual. I call him Fearless Follmer. And he not only drove that ridiculous little roller skate, or somebody called it a skateboard with a Chevy strapped on top of it, but he also drove the Formula One car. His first time in a Formula One car, first time in overseas. He'd never seen Kyalami before. And the man finished in the points, which in those days went down to 6th place. So George Follmer won a point in his very debut performance. And then a couple of weeks later in Spain, he finished 3rd. So I had a lot of personal interest in Shadow. And they were the American team that came into Formula One in 1973. And they were fairly shortly followed by 2 other teams, Parnelli and Penske. Neither of those stayed in very long, but Don Nicholls kept Shadow going through 1980, into the beginning of 1980, with very limited success and always with budgetary problems and other problems. But they did win a race. Alan Jones from Australia won his very first Formula One race in Austria in 1977. And later on, of course, went to be world champion. So Shadow had a midfield role to play in all of that.
But also, for those wondering, the book has also recently been given an RAC Motoring Book of the Year award for 2020. So, Pete, many congratulations on that accolade as well. It just shows the amount of passion and enthusiasm as it has taken me, and I'm going to be completely honest here, as I admitted to you, Pete, 4 weeks to read through this book, and there's
I'm so sorry.
No. It's been absolutely 100% pleasurable throughout the whole reading of it, and I am going to be picking that up again, like every book that I have been sent so far. Big thanks, first of all, to Rebecca Leppard for arranging everything with with us as well from Eventageous PR Ltd. She does
a great job.
She's and obviously Salon Privé recently has been hosted here in the United Kingdom, and I spoke with her on the phone, and she's such a lovely person. So Rebecca, a big thank you to you for allowing us to meet as individuals, but also through the wonders of modern technology.
Yes, right. Yeah, we couldn't have done this some years ago.
I know. But obviously, there's a lot of extensive interviews. Obviously, the late Don Nicholls. You've got the likes of George Follmer and Jacky Oliver, to name but a few that you.
Jacky Oliver was very helpful. Yes, right.
And obviously, with regards to crafting this kind of book, which I must be completely honest, for those wondering about the thickness, I've got my copy by my side. That's how thick the book is. So it's literally, it's about from my mouth to about halfway down towards my chin. But
it weighs about
yeah, it weighs about 2 kilos.
3 kilos. Yes.
I was like this. I lifted it up. I was like,
I know.
Holy cow! What kind of book is this? Then I opened it up, and I like literally there was a glint in my eye and a big smile on my face. But obviously, when crafting this with the help of people such as Jacky Oliver, how much does that mean to you as an individual? Obviously, you've spent a lot of time within motorsport, but to be able to craft this kind of book, to have that kind of insight, that must have been a really big help, Pete.
How does one answer that? This, of course, is I've done quite a few books before that. With Evro last year, I did a Lotus 72 book, and before that, I've done 3 books about the Can-Am series. I've done a book about Riverside Raceway, which is basically just up the road from us now, purely by coincidence. But my wife and I had our first date at Riverside Raceway, and we fondly remember the old place. So I've done a lot of books, and so you begin to get past the idea that this is daunting, I'll never finish it, to just keep plugging away and you'll get to the end at some point. I'd have to say that this book grew larger than it was intended to, so I apologize for the size and the weight, but it's 464 pages and it contains way over 100,000 words, but I just couldn't stop. It was just too much of a good story.
And it shows through the way it's written, the cadence, the tone that I gathered from it by having read it. And it was, it must have been a real, as you say, like it was longer than it intended to be. But out of that came a labour of love and something that has been highly recognised by the Royal Automobile Club. So as they say in France, chapeau, monsieur. Yeah. So with regards to it, you said that Jacky Oliver was very, very helpful with regards to providing insight. Was that through like the workings of the team, how everyone sort of gelled together and other things like that, was it?
Yes. I'm sure everyone knows that Jacky Oliver was followed George Fulmer as Don Nicholls' driver in Shadow, and later on became, I don't know what the right terminology is. It wasn't quite manager, but he had a business role to play. He was a big sponsor hunter, particularly as time went on and they needed more sponsors. But Jacky is very, very good at that. And as the world knows, that the two of them had a falling out, and it was basically a financial problem. And I feel that Jacky probably expected that he should be a shareholder in the business, and Don Nicholls just would not let it go. And but neither could Don pay him what he needed to get, and so Jacky finally decided that the only way forward is to start his own team, which he did. However, in later years, the two did reconcile. They have both told me that. Don, before he died a few years ago, and Jacky both have told me that they came into contact one historic race at Laguna Seca, one Monterey Historic Races weekend, and they had a conversation, and they made up. They agreed that they both understood and were friendly with each other again. So they ended on a good term.
That's very, very interesting to hear that. Obviously, after, people, we're human beings at the end of the day. There are times when discussions either get out of hand or one party decides to agree to disagree and then part ways. But then to hear that both Jacky and Don came back and reconciled is sort of like coming back a bit full circle, really, isn't it?
Yes, right. Don, of course, was a difficult character. Shadowy certainly applies to the man. He did have a warm side, a friendly side, a humorous side. His designer, Trevor Harris, who did the Tiny Tire car, calls it a wicked sense of humor. And he says, and I share that. We have the same wicked sense of humor. We find things funny that other people wouldn't even notice. But we can just give each other a look and we both know what the other one is thinking, that this is funny. And so maintain a lifelong friendship. And and Trevor Harris was another one who helped, as did Tony Southgate, the designer of the later shadows. There's so many people to thank here, but we've touched on some of the very important ones.
And obviously, one of the other things, Pete, is that the book was released to coincide with the 50th anniversary of Shadow originally being formed back in 1970. So I couldn't have thought of a better time for that to happen. And what a book it is. I mean,
well, that's thanks to Evro, Eric Verdon Rowe, and Mark Hughes, who's the editor there. And they were both marvelous to work with, and their enthusiasm was tremendous. They wanted to get this done, and to your sorry about your biceps there, but they let me keep writing. I said a couple of times, "Do you think I've got enough here? Should I stop?" No. If you got more to say, say more. We'll just add more pages. So,
well, I'm not.
Sorry. You shouldn't tell a writer to keep writing. He'll keep writing.
Well, or in my case, as a commentator, to keep speaking, because you can either keep writing or keep speaking for a long, long time. But from start to finish, Pete, how long did the book actually take from sort of like the initial sort of thoughts about it to starting putting the wheels in motion to finally getting that, like that sort of rock that was made into a polished diamond at the end of it? Because that is what it is at the end of the day.
Well, thank you. It was a lot of years. Before I actually did any work on it, back in the 1990s, I came together with Don at a social gathering at one of the historic races in Chicago, I think it was. Don was there, and his daughter Penny was there, who I remember as a teenager back in the day, but she's a mature, very capable woman now. And she and he were there, and in conversation, Don started talking about the two books he wanted to write. He wanted to write a book about his shadow experience, but also before that, he had a long career in the U.S. military, starting out with him being amongst the very first American troop boots on the ground at Normandy on D-Day. Before dawn on D-Day, he jumped out of an airplane to set up some signaling devices. And he was almost immediately wounded. And so, to Americans anyway, he is a hero of World War II, and I don't think people should forget that. But then he had this long experience in the military, and then as he retired from that, he segued into becoming a businessman in Japan. He imported a lot of material that the Japanese couldn't get otherwise, or didn't know how to get, and so Don was their go-between, and he made quite a lot of money. Finally, in the late 1960s, he came back to America and basically promptly spent all his money on this idea of building a new race car with Trevor Harris. He fell in with Trevor Harris, and the two hit it off perfectly. And Trevor has this wild and crazy imagination. He's a mad genius. He's absolutely wonderful. He's one of the most brilliant minds I've ever met. And he wanted to try this wild experiment to do a low drag car that would go fast enough down the straights to get around the corners, and it would still get around the corners, he hoped, to beat the conventional big bulky McLarens and Lolas of the day. It didn't quite work out like that, because the thing did go down the straightaway very fast. On its debut at Mosport, there's a long uphill bend from a slow hairpin called Moss Corner at the far end of the circuit, and then it climbs uphill for upwards of a mile. At the end of that, the McLarens and so on were going about 180 something, 178 or something. The Shadow was being clocked at 190 something. So it was a lot faster. Those numbers are actually accurate in the book. They're from my memory right now, so that's probably not the exact number. But it was like a substantial chunk faster on the straightaway when it got to the top of the crest of the hill and was faced with the next turn. Therein started the problem, because it had no brakes, it had no tire adhesion. The wheels bounced off the road because the suspension was so stiff. The shock absorbers were useless because they were little friction shock absorbers because the space was so small. So Trevor thought, well, he tried the old friction shock absorbers to see if they could be packaged and modified and modernized properly to work. Well, he says that was one of the biggest mistakes he ever made in his life, and he advised people never to do that again. So.
Well, as they say, once bitten, twice shy there, Pete,
Yes,
if I'm completely honest,
but
but nearly having a 20-mile-an-hour advantage at that
yes,
particular point in motorsport.
yes,
That's incredible.
it is. It was. And let's face it, George qualified, I think, sixth fastest on time around the laps for the start of the race on the third row of the grid in those days, which, it wasn't close to the McLarens, but it was quite a ways ahead of a lot of other people that were Can-Am regulars.
I mean,
There's a point that I'd like to mention is that I probably have been accused of being overly enthusiastic about the old Can-Am series, because if you just read the bare race reports and look at the finishing records and the time gaps between various positions as they cross the finish line, you'd say, what a boring series. How could this possibly be interesting? But dude, you've got to stand there and look at these things go by you. And you've got to realize that it was an era before computers. If you had a wild and crazy brainstorm like Trevor Harris had, or Peter Bryant had, or many other people had, Chaparral, Jim Hall's Chaparrals, the only way you could find out if it was a good idea or a bad idea, you didn't have a computer to make it, you couldn't build a virtual car and have it scurry around inside and spit out a virtual lap time for you. You had to build it and take it to a test track and try it. And that's what made the Can-Am so exciting to watch. It was a technological feast. Every weekend, there was something fascinating.
Yeah, I think
so
if memories. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut across you there, Pete. But
well, see, I'm talking. I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. But obviously, John Surtees was known within Can-Am circles as well. The later Grande John, and
he was the first
he was not. Yeah, exactly. So therein, there's a link to British motorsport history in its own right.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But I've got one final question to ask you, Pete, so we can wrap things up here. Apart from obviously finding out about Don's military history and the sense of humor, but as a person in general, you said that he had two very, very different sides to him. When it was the happy side, what did you experience when you were in the paddock when he was around back in those days?
In my experience as a journalist coming up to him to pester him with questions, he was cordial but not warm. If you talk to so many other people in motor racing, they are friendly. They'll welcome you in. They'll tell you all about what's going on. They hold secrets back. They may distort what they're telling you a bit for competitive reasons. But you just got the feeling with Don Nicholls that he was foreboding, severe, aloof, I think would be the right term, taciturn. On the other hand, people who were closer to him in his team say that he cherished the idea of being in a team, which I think goes back to his military career when he was in squads that were, tramping through France and Belgium and Holland and fighting battles with the Axis forces and so on. He was at the Battle of the Bulge too, Don was. And I think the racing team gave him that same sense of camaraderie that he used to have in his old military squads that he cherished so much. And so with them, people will say he was warm, friendly, joking. He was smiling a lot. He had that sense of humor. He liked to play on the idea that shadow came from the old radio program, the Shadow Knows. I don't know if you ever had that in Britain, but it was an American radio show, also a series of novellas and other things in book form. But the Shadow was a mysterious character that just lurked in the shadows. He had a cape on, and he basically solved crimes, rooted out the bad guys. And Don Nicholls loved that image, and the Shadow, the caped spy, became an emblem for the team. And the character in the novel was named Lamont Cranston, and on his shop coat, Don had the name embroidered Lamont, so that he loved to play up this this is part of his sense of humor, a sly sense of humor.
Very, very interesting. Well, Pete Lyons, the author of Shadow, The Magnificent Machines of a Man of Mystery. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us here on Downforce Racing. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Pete. And
Alex, it's a delight. Thank you very much. And I appreciate your enthusiasm for this book. I'm very pleased with it.